Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News at the South Florida Conservative News Center. It is Tuesday, December 30th, 11:12 a.m. And a story that just keeps on giving, among other things that are occurring here in South Florida and in the United States and the world, it seems. And we're going to discuss anti-Semitism and how anti-Semitism, in this case, has become a weapon. There's a phrase that keeps coming up lately, and that's rising anti-Semitism. And in many cases, that phrase is accurate. But tonight, or today, and every other day this week, I'd like to talk about something a little more specific and, frankly, a bit more dangerous. And it is what happens when anti-Semitism stops being just a belief and starts being used as a political tool again, because that shift explains a lot of what we're seeing right now inside conservative politics, inside media culture, and inside the growing fracture between Israel, American Jews, and the movements that once claimed to support them. So here we go. Anti-Semitism has always existed, always existed. It's in the Bible. Well, that's not actually true. What is new is how often it now appears not as conviction, but as convenience. In modern politics, people are not attacked simply for who they are. They're attacked for when they become expendable. When someone loses usefulness inside a factional struggle, when they're no longer aligned with the dominant coalition, the guardrails come off. And if that person happens to be Jewish, anti Semitic language suddenly becomes permissible. Not necessarily because hate increased, but because enforcement disappeared. And that's a distinction that nobody's talking about, and I feel that it matters. For decades, Jewish advocacy groups understood coalition discipline. It's a good term, look it up. Bad actors didn't make it on stage. Unlike recently, rhetoric was corrected early, boundaries were enforced quietly but decisively. Anti Semitism wasn't just condemned, it was made costly. That system has eroded. Today, we're watching openly anti Semitic rhetoric surface at major political events without immediate consequence. Not because it's popular, but because no one is clearly responsible for stopping it. When enforcement collapses, norms follow. So now this is where things get uncomfortable, and this is where we have gotten into some issues with a lot of other people. Long before this recent conservative infighting, there was a clear warning sign of this issue of how Jewish institutions responded to the controversies, specifically Kanye West's statements, those of you who know what they were, and Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, which also was a separate, two entirely separate things, but seemed to have been pushed together in one big punishment. Okay? Whatever you think of the statements, neither of them articulated a coherent anti Semitic ideology. Their remarks were provocative, sloppy. Irving didn't really even say anything, but Kanye is Kanye and entangled with broader grievances about power, representation, and culture. If you understand our take on Kanye West, go back and we will put links to some of the uh, talks that we've done about Kanye because he's a very important person in modern day culture, believe it or not. And, it's something that has to be addressed in the grand scheme. No man is an island, as they say. So, whatever you think about the statements, and as I said, I'm going to repeat myself, neither figure articulated a coherent anti Semitic ideology. Their remarks were provocative, sloppy, and entangled with broader grievances about power, representation, and culture. I had to say it twice so you heard it right the first time. Those claims only become anti Semitic when framed as collective malice or conspiracy, of which there was no conspiracy between the two. It just happened in the same period of time. Instead of precision, what followed was a maximum escalation. You had deplatforming, you had people losing their jobs, corporate severance, huge amounts of money were moved around, moral absolutism, threats of a lot of stuff that sounded very, very woke and were probably directed by people who were of that mindset, not caring so much about what the underlying topic was. So the problem was that response didn't educate skeptics or isolate real bigotry. It created the appearance of enforcement without explanation, and in some cases proved, proved the conspiracy that some people were talking about. Inside parts of the black community, especially, it fueled a hell of a lot of resentment, not because anti-Semitism suddenly, just jumped out because everybody in the community was super Jewish tolerant, but because the response looked punitive and selective and disproportionate and really enforced those master slave kind of things that people have been pushing since the 60s as far as black culture and Jewish community. Now, that perception mattered more than the intent. After the Kanye episode, anti Semitic narratives didn't disappear, as you noticed, they traveled farther because they now had a story attached to them. And of course, Kanye put out that record. But Overreaction didn't stop the fire. As I said, he put out the record, he gave it oxygen. He was going in his world of political expression. Other people were doing what they wanted to do. And the thread had been lost as to what was really going on there. This is the pattern we're seeing repeat. When Jewish figures become unpopular, Shapiro, misaligned, or occasionally associated with a losing faction, anti Semitism doesn't create the attack, but it accelerates it. Example: Ben Shapiro, anti Trump since the day he was born, supported Ron DeSantis against Trump for the presidency, owns a very large, or is part owner of a very large corporate uh, cable network empire, pushes that shit out on a lot of people. Had his fights with Candace Owens and this, that, and the other thing. I don't think that made her crazy, but it didn't help. So he is an efficient and easy target at this moment. One of the reasons that he is being targeted is not that he's a shit person or a bad businessman, but he's a Jew. So that accelerates it. It becomes the rhetorical shortcut, the dirty language it services once once the consequences have vanished. All right. This doesn't mean every attack on a Jewish figure is anti Semitic. But when anti Semitism appears during political removal, it tells us something critical. Norms are no longer enforced. And when norms collapse, bad actors don't need to persuade, they just need permission. And this problem doesn't stop at US politics. And this is the one that we're going with this. Everything is an evolving story. If you don't evolve, you die. The October 7th attack that shattered a core Israeli myth. The assumption that Israel and the Mossad, if it exists, have total intelligence dominance and perfect deterrence over militant Islam. In today's post trust environment, failure is read as complicity, secrecy is read as guilt. Israel responded like a 20th century security state. Limited disclosure, totally controlled narratives. Trust us, we've got it. But the world now runs on excess information. Without a visible public truth establishing process, conspiracies filled the vacuum. The Israelis let the Arabs do it because nobody actually was killed. They never took any prisoners, blah, 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 blah. Not because they were convincing, but because nothing authoritative replaced them. The same mistake repeated at a different scale. So, what actually works? If you're going to do this, what's going to actually work to calm this down? Early enforcement, okay? Anti-Semitism must become costly again before it reaches a stage or a viral clip. Second, they have to be precision. Not every provocation is an existential threat. Overreaction erodes credibility and radicalizes neutrals. We know a lot of this also occurs within the fundraising, bear with me, the fundraising mechanisms of some of these United States and European Jewish organization, because without a threat to Judaism, there's no reason for the organization to exist. So they are not helping themselves. I know we're going to hear about it, but they aren't. And at some point, we're going to talk about the disconnect between what occurs with Western Jewish people and the perception of what's going on there and what the Israelis are actually doing, which two almost entirely different things in a lot of different ways. All right. So, as I said, not every provocation is an existential threat. Could have let Kanye slide. Definitely could have let Kyrie Irving slide. Okay. All this other stuff. Nick Fuentes, he's a little pussy. Why isn't somebody stepping into him? You know, that's what I'm saying. Do you notice the difference in what is occurring? Fuentes, anti-Semite as they come. That other little guy who got slapped in the face, what's his name? Women propaganda. He's like 5'1". The guy slapped him in the face over some Jewish shit, I think it was. Pick your fights correctly, right? So now we're going to get back to my term coalition discipline. Allies are defined not by rhetoric, but by their willingness to enforce norms within their own ranks. Look it up, learn more about it. It's something that we should probably do an hour on in a real classroom situation, but nobody talks about it anymore. Visible accountability is a post-trust in a post-trust world, which is what we're in. Transparency isn't a weakness. It is a strategy. Be transparent about what's going on. And finally, you have to learn decoupling safety from personalities. Jewish security and Israel's legitimacy cannot depend on whether an individual media influencer is popular, useful, or aligned with the right faction this year. If you put all your faith in one of these talking heads that they are going to somehow save all of you in the United States or all of your cousins in Israel, you are doomed to failure. It's stupid. It's an American thing anymore. I mean, we used to be a lot more individualistic, but now we have these influencers because people can identify with them. Maybe you don't need to identify with the real leaders. Maybe you don't. In the old days, did you identify with Caesar? I don't know. I wasn't there. All I know is he paid them, he paid people to work for him. He had slaves, this and that and the other thing. Let's not get into that. But do not continue to do that. If you want to continue to have any kind of positive spin, positive rapport here in the United States, get away from these talking heads that are going to save you from the big bad anti-Semites. Do your own work as a community. Anti-Semitism has not changed. The environment has. It now thrives not just on hatred, but on institutional confusion, enforcement collapse, and strategic miscalculation. The choice facing these Jewish communities and Israeli leadership and political movements is not between outrage and silence, it's between competence and continued erosion. Now, there's a lot more that goes on with that. If you have any questions or comments, other than the usual bit shoot stuff, feel free to get a hold of us, and if we can, we'll do an episode along those lines. It is a very challenging topic. It's not black and white. I'm sure everyone, the Jews are evil. That seems to be the route everyone's going, or they control everything. And you have to get past that, or you're not going to be able to have a distinct individual ability to look at world affairs. That would be like fatalism. So you're really becoming an old Muslim, right? Oh, I can't do anything with my life because the Jews control the media. That's where you're going. And if you're going in that direction, just throw yourself off of a roof, because as a voting American citizen, you're absolutely useless to the rest of us. You are. Okay. You're better off worried about gypsies stealing your children and poisoning your wells. But that's just my opinion. So I probably ruined this other people's research by saying that, but it's true. And in that case, have a nice Tuesday, and New Year's is coming. See you later on.